Jared, I got the best phone call from a customer yesterday, and I have to tell the audience about it. And Sonny, kudos to you, buddy. You know who you are. Talking about listening to our podcast. He actually likes our podcast, which I find weird. But I know one part of what he told me was sincere. He said, can you do something about Jared? The guy needs to take some happy pills or something. He's such a Debbie Downer. And I thought that is just the most perfect description of my co-host, Jared Morgan. Thanks for being back on the podcast, Jared.
I don't find you funny, Eric, or Sonny.
Well, Sonny was funny. I didn't make it up.
Well,
It made my day.
You know what, guys? If y'all had to look at Eric while you do a podcast for the hour or whatever we do here, you wouldn't be very happy either, okay?
That's fair.
But in order to give our audience some education and hopefully we can help them, that's a big hope, this is just what we have to do.
Just putting up with me alone is climbing the ladder so that you're not quite the worst co-host of all time. You are getting up there, Jared, I gotta say.
You know what? As long as I can wear it like a badge and I'm just not the bottom, but I'm just very close to it, that's okay.
Well, look, consistency is key. And if we continue this, we're going to soon exceed 60 listeners. I'm fairly confident of it. And we have been receiving a lot of emails at podcast@orendatech.com. Great ideas for episodes. So thank you for that. And we have been receiving support requests or questions for our new help center, ask.orendatech.com. So people are finding it. People are using it. It's awesome. And sorry for the delay in getting back to you. I have a few that are a few days old, but I will do my best to get back to you.
I've been getting a ton of calls too, probably 2 or so. And
yeah, dude, ton. That's so many. Like, how do you have the time in the day?
I know. And this episode is going to be pretty enjoyable because if everybody doesn't know yet, we do get some naysayers. Quite honestly, it doesn't really get under my skin, or Eric's for that matter.
I think it's great.
It does create a healthy dialogue, and we want to set the record straight here on some of those things that are being floated out there. And we're going to call this episode, Here's to the Naysayers.
That's right. Episode 85. We are contrarian, so here's to the naysayers. Welcome to Rule Your Pool, the podcast by Orenda that explains and simplifies pool chemistry so that anybody, regardless of experience, can understand it. I'm your host, Eric Knight, bringing clarity to these subjects so that you can bring clarity to your water. If you're ready to rule your pool, then let's go. Jared, I have this long list on the show notes, but I know you don't read show notes. So
Whoa.
I'm going to send you a link, and I'm going to hope that you open it up because I wrote down so many bullet points.
Whoa. I want everybody to understand something right now. And I know this is going to make one particular person in our company very, very happy. Catherine Varden, I printed the show notes off. So Eric, eat it. And Catherine, you're welcome.
I am speechless. Let's do this.
All right. Orenda is full of it because the pH matters a lot, and we downplay that you can have any pH you want.
We don't say that pH doesn't matter at all, but it's absolutely true. You can have a much wider pH range because physics allows for that. And the whole idea that you can control pH is nonsense. It's physically impossible. The only thing that can control pH is physics. That would be Henry's law, where the CO2 equilibrium at the pH ceiling, when there's an equilibrium between CO2 in your water and CO2 in the air above the water. That's when your pH stays still. But we, because we've been following textbooks for so long, we try to impose our will upon water, and it doesn't work. So this idea that you can maintain a 7.2 to 7.8 is not true unless you have an acid feeder, trichlor feeder, or an auto cover. And the auto cover is because you lose the ability to lose CO2. You're basically capping your carbonated drink. But the whole reasons they give for this, Jared, are, Orenda shouldn't say that because of the pH of your eyes, right? Bather comfort is one of the main reasons. And another one is corrosion and scale. If your pH is too low, you'll etch. And if it's too high, you'll get scale.
Which technically that's correct.
Well, it can be, but we know that that's actually an LSI function, and the pH is a major contributor to the LSI. You can offset that lower pH by having more alkalinity, more calcium hardness, higher temperature. It's all about the LSI. So what we really say is, don't focus on chasing pH. Focus on anchoring your strategy in the LSI and then leveraging physics using the pH ceiling and allowing your pH to naturally rise because it's going to anyway. Your job is to make sure that when it gets to its pH ceiling, which you can determine by your carbon and alkalinity, you're still LSI balanced. So that after 7 days, you come back and you're still in the LSI balance, you win. That's what we're saying. Bather comfort, fake news, man. I got Deer Park water at 5.5 pH, and I've got alkaline water from Costco that says 9.5 pH. That's a 10,000 times difference in acidity, and yet they taste fine. I was a swimmer, you know that. It's really about chloramine byproducts and chlorine oxidizing things like sunscreen. That's what burns our eyes. It's not the pH.
Well, the biggest concern that we get is scale forming, and also they need their chlorine to be as efficient as possible. What do we have to say?
Well, we've color-coded that on our app. When you push show on your secondary readings, it will turn purple if your pH ceiling is too high.
Now, one thing we do need to cover here is that the chlorine efficiency is a factor, everyone. We understand that.
If you don't have cyanuric acid in your water, because when you do, that chemistry changes dramatically, as we show in multiple episodes, multiple blogs, Help Center, everywhere. And we didn't come up with this. We didn't do the research. We found this research from guys like Richard Falk, who explained it to us. All we're doing is publishing it.
And we do understand that as the pH increases, when cyanuric acid is in the water, technically it does matter as far as the efficiency goes. But it's so little that it's, quite honestly, it's not a major factor for consideration at those levels.
The percentage of hypochlorous acid at 7.0 is like 3%. And then at 8.0, it's like 2.87%. So it's negligible. But at the higher pHs, the hypochlorite ion will break away from CYA and you can start losing it to sunlight. That's true. But we want to set our ceiling at like 8.0 to 8.1 so that doesn't happen at a noticeable rate.
So we're getting into technicalities, and we just wanted to make sure we clarified all these because we do know that all these things come into play. But at the end of the day, we are trying to simplify this information so that you, our audience, or our industry can hopefully better understand it. That's it.
Yeah, you don't want to fight physics. You want to use it to your advantage. That's how we teach it proactively.
All right, Dak, moving on. We're going on to, we can have an alkalinity below 80 because we always tell people when they have salt pools and they have calcium flakes in their water and they're coming into this problem that's consistent, we say, hey, run your alkalinity at 70.
Or 60 something.
Yeah, if everybody understands, if they follow range chemistry first, they know that our range has to be between 80 and 120 parts per million. And we bucked that trend. So, therefore, it's going to cause a problem.
Well, you're missing one half of this equation. You're right. You can absolutely go below 80. I wouldn't say go below 50 because it's kind of a slippery slope. But 50 something, 60 something, even 70 something is fine for a saltwater or liquid chlorine pool. You'll need a little bit more for trichlor. But that's when the water's warm enough that the salt cell is firing. Because in the colder temperatures, you actually want 80 or 90 or even 100 alkalinity if you're winterizing your pool because of the LSI. So the other half of this equation is this only works in the context of a managed LSI. The argument is like, hey, Orenda, you're saying you can have alkalinity under 80, but if you do that, you'll destroy your pool. You'll etch your plaster, you'll destroy your equipment, you'll ruin your heater. That would be true if you don't have enough calcium hardness to offset it. And that's the missing piece. So we are not saying just have low alkalinity because that's where it should be. We're saying that you want to lower the alkalinity to limit your pH ceiling within the context of the LSI. Huge difference. Anything you want to add before moving on?
Nope, that pretty much covers it. Orenda says 50 parts per million or less CYA, but if I have more cyanuric acid, I can hold chlorine longer.
Well, that's true. You can, but that's a two-edged sword. We talked about this a few episodes ago, that you can choose to have 60 or 70 cyanuric acid, knowing full well that you're slowing your chlorine dramatically, and that gets into a chlorine efficiency conversation where you might start to get outbreaks. Chlorine is about speed. It's not about strength. It's about speed, contact time specifically. So 1 part per million over 10 seconds is the same as 10 parts per million in 1 second. So the faster your chlorine can kill and oxidize, the better. CYA slows that down. So yeah, you can deliberately slow your chlorine down so it lasts longer, but are you actually staying ahead of what's trying to grow in your pool? What we're saying is you want minimal CYA because you want sunlight protection before you start to get that diminishing return. Because there's not that much difference between 50 and 70 in terms of sunlight protection, but there's a huge difference between 0 and 30. Right? So the lower you have it, you get the benefits without slowing down your chlorine. So, I mean, I get the argument. I just disagree with it.
Moving on. So phosphates don't matter, dude.
Oh, I've read this so many times on forums and other websites. Yeah, they're made up so that Orenda can sell more product. Well, we're not the only ones selling phosphate remover, and they sell very well in all brands because the pros know this and the homeowners know it. It makes managing pools easier. If there was nothing to it, they wouldn't sell. The market speaks volumes. The research also speaks volumes. This is research that we got from guys like Richard Falk, who are leading the industry in this kind of research. So yeah, I mean, if you don't want to focus on phosphates, you need enough chlorine to stay ahead of what chlorine has to kill. Specifically with CYA, you need at least 7.5% of your CYA level in free chlorine. So if you had 100 CYA, your new baseline is 7.5 parts per million. Good luck maintaining that.
I was going to say, can you do that for a solid week when you're a pool professional? You're there once during that week?
Good luck. You're going to have to chlorinate to like 15 or 16 parts per million, and nobody's going to want to swim in that. At least they shouldn't. Well, you should not be treating it like that.
No. Can you manage a pool without phosphate removers or having high phosphates? Absolutely.
Yeah.
No question. Yes, you can. It's just obviously our opinion that it has to be taken into consideration because it increases the likelihood of problems down the road. And what we are trying to do is be proactive. We want to make sure that our chemicals are efficient as we can possibly make them and be proactive.
Stop relying on chlorine to do all of your heavy lifting. Instead, be more efficient and decide to take phosphates.
All right, good job, Eric. Next, we're going to the Orenda startup conflicts with other methods out there, so therefore I can't do it.
Are you going to let me ask you any of these questions? I'll answer
this
one.
No, I like cutting you off. I really like cutting you off in the middle of your explanations.
You're getting good at this. Okay, say it again. I'm already off track.
Oh, I'm sorry. I want to do the Orenda startup, but it conflicts with the other startups out there, so I can't do it.
That's true, but that's changing. Manufacturers are starting to adopt our startup, not because it's ours, but because it works. And it's LSI based, not Orenda based. So focusing on the saturation index instead of range chemistry, certain pH parameters, certain alkalinity parameters. The biggest one, of course, is the NPC startup, which is close in our opinion, but it is not LSI based if you do the math. Like you try to plug in those numbers, there's no mathematical way that you can maintain LSI balance in those first critical days. And it's our belief that the first few minutes matters a lot. So it's not like water just fills a pool and waits to start etching. No, it's going to eat if it's imbalanced, and almost all tap water is aggressive. Not all, but almost all water in the country comes out red on the LSI. So we have more urgency to it. We say, let's fill this water so it doesn't feed on your walls. And if that conflicts with standards, then screw it. The standards are not accurate enough for your pool if that's your case. But it all depends on your tap water, Jared.
Absolutely. And a lot of my, I don't want to say rebuttal, because it's not like we're arguing with these people. If they don't want to do the startup or they want to have a problem with it, that's fine. I mean, we're not for everybody. We understand that. But if you went to the plaster manufacturers and read their information, they will say, don't fill a pool with soft water. And my argument to that is, well, how do you fill a pool with not soft water?
Yeah, if you're not doing our method, right? I mean, there's the bicarb startup, and this is the same concept. On Balance came up with a bicarb startup decades ago, and it's the same idea. It's based on the LSI. It's not based on range chemistry. Like this whole idea that you can maintain 7.4 to 7.6 pH in the first 5 days of plaster, you're out of your mind. It doesn't happen that way. You have to saturate the water based on the LSI.
Well, good job, Eric. Next, we're going to talk about, I did the Orenda startup, but did you really?
Well, I don't even know how to answer this one.
He didn't get the show notes on this one because I just wrote them down on my paper. All right. Well, I get this call a lot because people are like, well, I did your startup and it just didn't work. And then when you start...
Oh, I know where you're going with this. I've had this phone call too.
Yeah, you start peeling back the sheets a little bit and you quickly realize they did not do our startup.
At all.
All they did was add calcium to a bucket, poured it in the pool, and said, voila. That is not our startup.
Or they used a competitor product which has an acidic pH and it screws up the pool royally.
Correct. Yeah. If you're going to call and say you did our startup,
we'll know.
Maybe take our Startup Academy, download the startup procedure page and just read it, and let's just make sure we understand it. But the bottom line is, it's not just a calcium-based startup. Our startup is an LSI-based startup. Most of the time, it involves the addition of calcium.
Moving on, Jared. I'm going to cut you off this time.
Go ahead.
Nice. Okay. Orenda's education is heavily biased, and we only make it so that we can sell more products. What do you say to that, Jared?
Fact.
I mean, you do pay the bills, but I would say to that, in 2016, we made a decision as a company to pivot from just another chemical company into an education company. And if you have listened to this podcast, I think there's been 5 or 6 episodes where we talk about products out of 85. We try not to talk about products. In fact, I didn't want to do it. If you read our blogs, less than 5% of them talk about our products at all. Now, we do have procedures that explain how to, because we get those questions. But our education is not about our products. Our products just allow you to be proactive in your pool care. Taking Orenda Academy, there's only one section at the end that talks about products. So I don't look at it as we're educating to sell products, but I'm also not going to make any apologies for the fact that we make our money selling products. We're a business. That's how we have to pay our bills.
And quite honestly, we get a ton of phone calls, probably like 6, of customers that just call us who don't use our products at all. I mean, they really don't. But you know what? It's our take is to help people in general, and maybe they'll come along, maybe they won't. But if we provide the information and hopefully help them along the way, they'll remember that. And that's really it.
Well, I have customers call that say, oh, well, your green pool cleanup didn't work. I'm like, okay, well, what did you do? Well, I chlorinated, I added a phosphate remover, and then I added, it's like, wait a second. You added a phosphate remover? What did you add? And they get real quiet. Well, I couldn't afford yours, which brings me to my next point. This whole idea that we're the most expensive chemical company. Well, we are if you look at the size of the bottles, but actually lately with COVID, not so much. It's actually pretty competitive, but you're not looking at the dose. You're not looking at the price per dose. You're looking at the price per volume, and our stuff is super concentrated. So don't get focused on the price of the bottle. Look at how many doses you get in that bottle, which is why we talk about measuring your pool chemicals.
And I think we mentioned in a previous podcast, we are transitioning to a more pools per gallon method, which involves measuring, dosing with the app properly, getting your practices up to date, and
diluting with a bucket.
Good. Let's start there. And obviously, we're not going to be the cheapest, everybody. We understand that. But like Eric said, a lot of stuff has changed over the past 2 years, and, maybe it's time to take another look.
Yeah. Anything else you want to add on that?
No, I do not. Let's move on to Orenda wants higher calcium hardness levels, and it's going to lead to scale.
Well, that's an LSI function. The amount of calcium carbonate in your pool is calcium hardness, but how saturated that calcium carbonate is in those given conditions, like temperature, alkalinity, pH, that's the LSI. And the LSI is what water cares about. So the analogy of sugar in your drink, if you change the temperature of your drink, you can dissolve more sugar. But it's the same amount of sugar that you poured into the drink. It's just some of it sat at the bottom at the colder water, and then you raise the temperature, and then it all dissolved. So it's not a amount of calcium hardness that creates scale unless it is too much saturation on the LSI in those conditions. Where we see this the most is in hot climates with a lot of evaporation, heaters, spas, because in those conditions, you have a localized LSI violation. But we have commercial pools, Jared, on Cal Hypo that have 700 plus calcium hardness, and they don't have scale because they're managing the LSI. So it's not an amount. It's the LSI.
And on that same note, Orenda wants us to winterize with extra calcium in the water, but I don't want to have scale in the spring, Eric.
No joke, because in the spring, you don't have scale. It's almost always the opposite of scale. Crystals, calcite crystals, come out of the plaster. Winter dust comes out of the plaster, and then as the temperature rises, precipitates as dust. So it's not scale, even though it's calcium carbonate. And this is where people screw up because they think, oh, I had too much calcium going into the winter. But that's not true. You didn't have nearly enough. That water got hungry in December and started eating your walls. That's why the calcium went up. pH spiked through the roof. You know you did it right when you come back and your pH is exactly at the pH ceiling and your calcium is probably diluted from where you set it off in the fall. And so the type of cover matters too, because you got a mesh cover, solid cover, dilution, CO2 leaving, all this stuff. But the point is, insulate your pool for the winter. Feed that hungry bear before it hibernates so it doesn't wake up in the winter and eat your pool.
Well, I had a email actually yesterday from a customer in Oklahoma, which appreciate it if you listen to the Rule Your Pool podcast. I'm going to talk about you here for a second. But he said he closed a pool down in October of last year, and they opened the pool in May of this year, and they had just this white haze all over the bottom of the pool, which was more than likely winter dust. And it brought up a good point that I'm going to tell you right now, everybody. If you're in Oklahoma, Texas, south of Tennessee, and you're opening a pool in May, that water's not that cold anymore. It's pretty warm. And when you wait that long to balance the chemicals and so forth, you're going to have some issues. And that is one of them, because that temperature increased dramatically from the lows of 33, 34 degrees in January to probably 70-ish degrees in May.
Right. But that 40-degree swing just slam dunks the last point we just made. It's not about the amount of calcium hardness. It's about the LSI. The temperature changed the LSI. And you have to be prepared for that. So yeah, we absolutely advise for more calcium hardness, knowing full well the temperature is going to get colder. But don't wait till May to open up your pool. Okay, I got one for you.
Okay, fine.
Orenda says that the calcium flakes in saltwater pools are calcium carbonate, but a lot of people say that that's calcium phosphate.
I would say negative. Is calcium phosphate a reaction that can occur in your swimming pool? Sure.
Super rare.
Yeah, but if anybody knows or is aware if they've run into this problem, calcium phosphate is extremely hard. I mean, it solidifies to a rock, call it. Calcium carbonate is soft. It's like a fingernail. It's flimsy. You break it apart, you can touch it and basically mash it in your fingers, right? We've all played with it and seen it. And if you just look at the chemistry of how a salt cell works and what exactly it's doing, and as the water's passing by, and why we think it's calcium carbonate, is because in that salt cell, you are spiking that pH way beyond the 8.2 something threshold, where you start introducing carbonates to the water. And when you have calcium and a spike in carbonates, you are going to get calcium carbonate.
Right. Well, this myth was perpetuated because they would take samples of this stuff and put it in water, and then they'd test for phosphates in the water, and they'd find high phosphates. There's actually no correlation. That's just a coincidence. Calcium phosphate, as Jared is saying, is harder than concrete. It is really hard to get rid of. It would not flake off and blow into your pool. I've never seen that happen. Every time I've seen calcium phosphate, it's been on a commercial pool that's very hot, like a therapy pool indoor, cal hypo, and high phosphates in that pool, usually using sequestering agents or something, and it's almost always in a filter of some kind or a heater. I've never seen it in a pool, ever. And we deal with problems all the time. So calcium phosphate, if you have it, I hope you don't, because you would know. It's a huge difference between the flakes, and these flakes are easy to get rid of.
Next, so Orenda has always been anti-borate, and now we've caved because we included it in our app.
Oh, I love this. So many questions about borates that we've had. Where do you want to begin? Because I could talk for minutes on this.
I'm not going to talk for minutes, and the bottom line is, honestly, it's not that we're anti-borates. It's more of we just don't think it's necessary. We think that the benefits are oversold, and the reason we included it in the calculator now is because it does have an impact on the LSI, and if we want to be as open and honest as possible, we felt that it was important to include it in our calculator, which is why it is now there.
We don't want to demonize practices unless we know that they're completely wrong. And here's the truth. For many years, the latest research was showing that borates are illegal for toxicity reasons. We didn't look much further into that because they were listed and illegal to sell in California. We didn't go into this depth of research to find out why. We just knew that they were illegal to sell in pool stores in California, and they still are today. So why would we do the research on something that's illegal to sell in a pool store? So we didn't. So Harold has been very vocal. We don't want to put anything toxic in a pool. That's the Orenda philosophy. That's Papaw's law. We don't want to put algaecides in a pool because of things that stay behind. No long-term byproducts, no chemical conflicts. It just didn't fit our philosophy. And so as we got all these questions over time, and kudos to the late Bob Lowry for doing the lion's share of this research, and then also kudos to Richard Falk for helping us distill that and understanding what it was, we came to an understanding of what this stuff is. We don't recommend it because we don't think it's necessary, but we're not going to demonize you for using it as long as you don't use too much of it. So that's where we're at.
This next topic we're going to discuss hits near and dear to my heart, Eric.
You have a heart?
People say that our Rule Your Pool podcast is lame.
Well, they're right.
I think they're really just referring to you.
No, there's no disagreement there.
I didn't want to say
the worst. Well, we've been pushed out of the top 17 of swimming pool industry podcasts, so we got to do something to get back in there.
But we have been growing at a pretty slow rate. Like you said earlier, we have to be close to 60 listeners now.
But consistent.
But people actually do call us and tell us that Jared is a lame host. And that hurts my feelings.
No, there's only one guy and he said you need happy pills. Everyone's always like, we love Jared. We want more Jared. I'm like, I'm on that podcast too.
What they really want is more Blue. I mean, Blue has been pretty lame these last couple of episodes.
Blue the cat.
I just said Blue's name and he just walked in the room. He's right here.
Oh, Blue's with us? Put him on the keyboard. We need to see him now.
He doesn't like me picking up. Nope. He ran away like a cat does. Hey, Eric, our app's inaccurate. Why is it different from other LSI calculators out there?
Yeah, I get this question a lot. We actually just did a whole episode on this. The reason is the LSI apps out there, we were one of the first, by the way, back in 2017. And we did this too. There's a reference chart for different factors. And there could be a difference between, like, I don't have the chart in front of me, but let's say 75 to 78 degrees is the same factor. Well, what if you have 77 degrees or 76 degrees? Which factor do you choose? And so a lot of the apps are based on this table of factors without much accuracy in between. And so what we did for many years on our calculator was we took that chart, we based it off of that, and then we extrapolated each degree, for instance. So every degree in Fahrenheit and Celsius had its own, specific factor. Same thing with every single alkalinity in units of 10. Now it's units of 5. But we have since changed to account for things like the densities of chemicals, the density of water at given temperatures. So it's a far more accurate thing. We had help doing that, but that's why we believe it is the most accurate LSI calculator in the world. That's the only reason we did the update, is to make sure that we had the most accurate LSI calculator in the world.
Hey, Orenda, your SC1000 is no better than any other sequestering agent, and it knocks out chlorine, so it's not worth it.
Well, the second part is absolutely true. And the first, I wouldn't say it's not worth it, but the second part, it does knock out chlorine when you purge. And that's because it's immune to chlorine. Chlorine is going to try to oxidize it. It loses. So it wipes out chlorine until SC1000 finds a metal or mineral to bind to. But we never actually say it's any better than a sequestering agent. I've been sure to never say that because it binds just as well as pretty much any other sequestering agent to do its job. It just lasts longer.
And if you've called the hotline and asked for help and consideration on other things, we actually do recommend other products and competitors' products. I do all the time, because our deal is, as long as you know what you're doing and why you're doing it, and you can manage the byproducts after the fact, you absolutely can use another sequestering agent or some other product to help you rule your pool. I mean, that's really the bottom line.
Sometimes it's necessary to do a little bit of bad to remedy a bigger problem and then correct your course afterwards. So the analogy is kind of like taking ibuprofen. If you take ibuprofen, it relieves pain, but if you take too much of it, it can cause damage to your stomach and your liver if you take too much of it for too long. So like a sequestering agent, yeah, they're phosphate-based. We're not demonizing them. They work. They work really well. So if you're trying to remove metals, for instance, and you have a lot of metals in your water, we will recommend competitors' products, specifically something like See You Later. That's a great product. It's an awesome metal removing product. And use a sequestering agent to more rapidly get rid of metals. You could do it with SC1000 too, but perhaps a sequestering agent is going to work faster. And that's probably what you need to do, knowing full well that later on you're going to have to deal with those phosphates.
But Eric, this definitely conflicts with the next question or problem. Orenda is just a greedy chemical company that wants to sell more chemicals.
Well, what is greed? Self-interest? I mean, we are in business and we make no apologies for growing our business. The idea that we're misleading people to sell more products, that would require talking about our products more. We don't ever do a presentation about products.
Not a features and benefits presentation on products.
It's not a sales presentation. It's water chemistry education. When I first got into this industry, Jared, you remember this was 2016, I sat through every class that I could at these trade shows. I was told to. I was a new hire. I didn't know chemistry yet. And they were all product pitches. They were talking about their chemical line. You have this problem, buy this product. You have this problem, this is what this other product's going to do. I didn't learn anything. So I had to start doing water chemistry research outside of the pool industry so I could get away from the bias of these companies that were teaching classes. To their credit, though, one company that did very well with education was Taylor. And that was Wayne Ivasich, who just retired. So Wayne, we love you. I don't know if you listen to our podcast. Probably not, because you're cooler than us. But
we only have 60. I mean, what's the chance he's one of the 60?
I'll text this episode to Wayne because I learned a lot from you. And Bob Lowry was the same way. He didn't sell products. He was educating. And that's what we want to do. We want to educate.
On that note, people call all the time. Your dose rate says this. Can I double the dose? And I will absolutely tell them no. Do not do that, even though it's going to result in more product usage and so forth. But at the end of the day, we want to make sure that you are applying the products as prescribed and dosed and not more. Now, we do run into some problems of people underdosing because they don't want to use as much. And that could create another problem down the road, which if I've talked to you about that, you know why.
One final note on that before we move on is it would violate our own philosophy to recommend overdosing our own products. We want as little in that water as possible. We want to take things out of your water. We want the purest water possible with the least in it. So overdosing our chemicals doesn't do you any good. We want to have the correct dose to remove the contaminants that you have. Now, a heavily loaded commercial swim school and water park is going to require more enzymes than a backyard pool that gets used once a week. So the doses are different. That's why. So don't.
Well, on this same note, we're moving on to Orenda makes stuff up and pretends it's research and it's not fact-based. Eric.
Well, that would be the case if I didn't get everything vetted before we published it. And we do send it to people who know way more than we do, and they are gracious enough with their time to make sure we have our equations right, that our facts are accurate, because if we can pass, for instance, the Richard Falk test or get it to our friends who are chemical engineers and chemists, they will tell us where we're wrong, and we will not publish something that is not fully accurate. And I made this mistake early on, and here's what happened, Jared. You remember it. I was sitting in a class back in 16 or 17 at the trade shows. It was my first year in the company, and it's a class about phosphates. And the question was, why do phosphates weaken chlorine? And they had this formula on their PowerPoint that I wrote down that phosphates took a hydrogen away from HOCl, hypochlorous acid, and that's what weakened chlorine. That was not true, but I thought it was because I learned it in a class. We published that and got crushed by chemists online from that, specifically Richard.
Well,
and we corrected it. We remade our video. Like, we do not want to be that company that makes anything up. Everything is backed and vetted.
I would agree with all that because at the end of the day, we are people. We are not perfect, but we've learned some things along the way. And one of those is that we absolutely want to make sure that the information we put out there is as honest and accurate as possible. And we don't just put stuff out there on a whim. We read it multiple times. We make sure that it is going to be accurate in the way that, it needs to be worded and so forth. So we've gone through a vetting process a lot. And if you think these blogs are bad, boy, oh boy, just wait until we get into script reads for our academies. Those are painful.
It takes an average of 3 to 5 weeks for me to go through the entire process of writing a blog, from research to writing the draft to getting it vetted to correcting everything and then finally publishing it. These are not things that I just write in an afternoon and publish because it's something I feel like. No, there's a lot of thought.
I know, guys. He makes me read these at least like one time before they can go out.
And Jared can't read. Okay, moving on. Orenda always criticizes algaecides and recommends against them, but they work so well, Jared.
We don't say they don't work because they do. They're algaecides. They have EPA registrations.
They kill algae.
They do. We obviously have a different approach. We just don't think they're necessary, and we think they're reactive products. So therefore, we don't recommend the use of them.
Well, hold on. I mean, there's some proactive algaecides, right? The 60 and 90-day polyquats. Those are proactive, aren't they, Jared?
With long-term byproducts, that would violate a rule in our overall philosophy. We have beliefs that we don't want to compromise. And I'm not saying y'all are wrong. It's just that's not our practices.
Orenda is not just a product line. It's a belief system. And we do not want long-term byproducts in those pools. We want everything to be able to be drained down into the river and not kill fish. We care about the long-term health of that water. We don't want to overtreat it. We don't want to be in a chemical cocktail. So I will step up to the plate and say, I don't like algaecides because of what they leave behind. We have our belief system, and if you don't want it, that's fine. We're not forcing you to do anything.
Hey, Eric, did you know that enzymes digest oils, organics, non-living organics, and so forth?
Technically, enzymes are non-living. They are amino acids and proteins, but they're not living things. So the idea that you have to be alive to digest something is the argument here. I don't know that I agree with it. This is really semantics. So technically, it's a type of metabolizing. It's biooxidation in a way. Basically, an enzyme catalyzes a reaction to break it down to lower the energy level for further oxidation. That is a type of metabolizing or digestion, but it's not living. What we're referring to is breakdown of organic material. And that's true. That's what they do.
This is something that we're just trying to simplify what's going on so that it is a ease of understanding. And that's really what it comes down to.
Something relatable, like beer. Like we talk about a carbonated beer when we talk about Henry's Law and the pH ceiling, because we can all relate to the bubbles in a beer, and then the beer goes flat. It's not that you have beer in your pool, although you might. We're just trying to make it relatable with analogies. So that's what that's all about. How about this one, Jared? The LSI is not appropriate for pools because Dr. Wilfred Langlier made it for closed systems like boilers. Why are we using it for pools?
Because water's water. It does not care whether it's in a closed system, in a boiler, in a swimming pool, or in a air handling, evaporation system. Doesn't matter. Water is water. If you want to know the calcium saturation of whether it's going to scale or if it's too low and aggressive and it's going to cause etching and so forth, you got to have the LSI.
And it has been adapted to pools because it needs the carbonate alkalinity, not the total alkalinity. Our app does all this math for you, but it's been adapted to pools to account for things that impact the carbonate alkalinity, like cyanuric acid and now borate. So yeah, it's the gold standard. That's what every industry is using. But one of the arguments we get from some of our commercial dealers is, well, the Reisner index is more appropriate because it forces a higher level of calcium. And, the Langlier saturation index was never made for pools, but the Reisner is all about corrosion. And listen, the difference between Reisner and LSI is so small. I mean, there are differences, but generally speaking, if you're using one or the other, you're doing a good job.
If you're using either one, or if it's on your radar and you have a philosophy that you're going to pick one or have a similar thing you follow, kudos to you. You're doing something proactive. I can't complain with you.
Absolutely. Okay, one more thing. I'm going to come back to the pH thing because this is probably the biggest one that we get. But Orenda says pH cannot be controlled, but it has to be. And if it couldn't be controlled, why do systems exist that are called pH controllers, Jared?
Because a lot of those systems are commercial applications, and they generally, most likely, don't have cyanuric acid in the water, and your strength of chlorine is absolutely going to be dependent on that pH level. Now, controlling the pH is a losing proposition because you're going to constantly beat your head against the wall. I'm not saying you can't do it. It's just going to be very, I guess...
Well, I'm going to jump in. I'm saying you can't do it unless physics is doing it for you, because all a pH controller does, what chemical does a pH controller add?
It's adding acid or carbon dioxide.
To lower the pH, but there's no bicarb feeder. There's no soda ash feeder.
No.
This is because physics is forcing your pH to rise. So you're not controlling it. All you're doing is like pushing a helium balloon back down.
Yeah.
It rises up, you push it back down. It rises up, you push it back down. If that's control, I don't like that word. pH management system sounds a lot better to me, but we don't make this equipment. But the point is, you cannot control pH. That is a physical fact. The only thing that's going to control pH is when your CO2 is in equilibrium in the water and the air above it, and your pool is, so to speak, flat, like a beer goes flat. When CO2 can't leave anymore, your pH is controlled because it can't rise anymore.
But generally speaking, that's going to be at a higher pH, Eric,
So you better be LSI balanced when you're there, Jared. All right. Well, this has been episode 85. Jared, are there any more criticisms that we want to smack around a bit?
I don't think so. I hope everybody enjoyed the episode because we just kind of wanted to clear the air. We're not calling anybody out in particular. This is just something we've heard repeatedly, and we do appreciate the calls, the emails, the text messages, and we do like helping people. That's the bottom line.
Mm-hmm. For sure. And I always welcome challengers. And anytime I'm teaching a class, I say, you can ask me anything you want. Challenge me all you want. All I ask is you raise your hand first. And we welcome the discussion. We take phone calls from people that criticize us, and then we try to explain like what we're actually saying. And generally it's like, oh, I wasn't thinking about those other factors. The principal one was the very first one. Like, we're not saying that you should have a pH that stays high all the time. We're saying that it's going there anyway. Contain around it. Use the LSI. We're thinking through these in a holistic way. We're not thinking about one specific factor. We're thinking about your water and what water wants.
Well, and the fact that people, are out there and they'll vocalize it and they'll tell us or they'll put it out into social media and so forth. We do appreciate it because if you're thinking it and you vocalize it, somebody else is probably thinking the same thing. So it gives us an opportunity to clarify things. And like I said before, We are humans. We are not perfect. And if we can improve on what we say or how we say it or how we do it, we are absolutely open to suggestions.
That's right. This has been episode 85 of the Rule Your Pool podcast. We love you so much. Thank you for calling us. And I mean, the hotline rings with people saying they found our podcast. It means a lot to us. We spent a lot of time doing this and we enjoy it. This is kind of the highlight of our week. Wouldn't you agree, Jared?
Maybe your week. I'm still having to look at you though.
Oh, man, you always find a way to speak the nicest things.
I got to bring it back down for our one caller who thought I was a little bit of a downer.
He was right, though. Listen to you. He was right. The help center for most of these questions, ask.orendatech.com. The email, if you have podcast questions or ideas, we are always looking for more ideas, is podcast@orendatech.com. I'm your host, Eric Knight. This has been Jared, who is becoming the host. He keeps being on this show. Jared, thanks again for being on here.
Happy to be here, and thank you all for listening, and we appreciate it very much.
All right. Take care, everyone. You're the best.
Thank you for listening to Rule Your Pool, a podcast by Orenda Technologies. For more information on what we discussed in this week's episode, check the links in the description or visit www.orendatech.com.
I hope you find this show valuable enough that you tap that subscribe button and share it with your friends. You can also like us on Facebook and social media. With our help, you'll be able to rule your pool without over-treating it with chemicals and wasting money. I'll see you next episode.